Hello, and welcome to Superstitious Squirrel. Today we are going to be talking about one of the most widely known superstitions in the Western world and one of the most widely held superstitions. Over 8% of the population has this superstition that is actually acknowledged as a medical phobia. Now, I'm going to try and say the words. It's even got two names. It's got two long names that are even harder to say than supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, so bear with me here. Um, the first word was coined by Dr. Donald Dossey, the owner of the Stress Management Center and Phobia Institute in Asheville, North Carolina. So Dr. Donald Dossey, when he became aware of the scope of this phobia, he he called the Greek consulate, the ambassadors, and said, "Hey, how do you say Friday the 13th in Greek?" And they told him, and he coined the term, and it ended up in medical journals because the doctors and the psychiatrists take these phobias seriously. It can ruin lives. So the word that Dr. Dossey coined is paraskesphedicat. Wait, okay, I'm gonna read it. I cannot say this from memory. Paraske Paraskevidecatriophobia. Para Paraskevidecatriophobia. Paraskevidecatriophobia. No S. Triophobia. I'm not gonna try and say it again. Or with the Norse language mixed with Greek, it is frigatriskaidekaphobia. That one was so much easier to say. The other one, I'm going to try until I'm blue in the face, and someday I might get it. So, the Stress Management Center and the Phobia Institute in Asheville, North Carolina, did some studies, and they estimated that approximately 17 to 21 million Americans, just in America alone, suffer from this fear in the extreme. Um, Not to mention countless, European countries or other countries that also hold this superstition. It is not worldwide, but it is highly Western. So the symptoms range from mild anxiety and a nagging fear of doom to full-blown panic attacks. And you guys might think that's silly, but there are some things like I know I sound like scoffing sometimes when I'm doing these, but I have my own phobia that you could tell me till you're blue in the face that it ain't true. But if I walk out the door without two pennies, I walk right back in the door to get my two pennies, or I know I'm going to be having a panic attack by the time I get down the road. Um, Perfectly illogical. Uh, it is based in lore. If you guys want to know about that superstition, let me know, and we'll do that one time. But it's not leaving the house without your two pennies. So we've got those symptoms from mild symptoms to life-altering symptoms. And then a study done in 2008 by financial experts helped with Dr. Dossey. They estimated that businesses lose between 800 and 900 million US dollars every Friday the 13th because such a majority of people are afraid to go traveling. They avoid going to work, shopping, or even leaving their house. It's phenomenal. And it's it's out of hand. It really, really affects the economy on those days as well as complete lives. That day could ruin your life if and not just because it's bad luck, but because that fear is so palpable. You know what I mean? So we're going to break it down to the two components that make it. And the first component that I'm going to talk about is the number 13. Has his own name. The fear of the number 13 is triskaidekaphobia, and that's in the Frigga triskaidekaphobia. I'll be a mess by the time this is done. I'm not even going to be able to say the word poop. And the number 13, I'm sure you've all heard of hotels that don't have 13th floors, of airlines that don't have 13 roads. And one really huge superstition that I never even heard of until I started doing this research was don't have 13 dinner guests. So I will get into that. So, according to Dr. Donald Dossey and several other doctors of phobias and superstitions, the number 13 has always been considered unlucky. They really cannot trace its absolute origins. But what they think is that especially in Western cultures, we've historically associated the number 12 with wholeness, with completeness, with that fulfillment of having done a job well done. So, just for instance, we have 12 days of Christmas, 12 months in the year, 12 zodiac signs, the 12 gods of Mount Olympus in the Greek, and 12 tribes of Israel. Those are just a few numbers showing the completeness of 12. So 13 became that number just a step beyond the completeness, and it actually became just a fear of the unknown. We don't know what's beyond that which is complete. So the number 13, since numbers were made, has just been kind of wonky. Then, between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, in the Norse mythology and Germanic mythology, there was a god named Balder. And Balder was the god of light, joy, purity, and the summer sun. Now, Balder had a dinner party and he invited 12 guests. Um, Not a problem, right? This god was loved by everybody. Everybody wanted to come to his parties, but he only invited 12 of the other Norse gods to dine with him in Valhalla. Well, Loki, the trickster god of chaos, got wind of this party. And he's like, I'm going to crash a party. And Loki wasn't good or bad, but he was compelled to cause chaos. So when he arrived at the party as the 13th and uninvited guest, he decided to kill Balder. And he killed Balder with a sprig of mistletoe. There's a story behind that. If you'd like to hear that story, comment below. I'm always happy to do some research and tell y'all stories. I love this stuff. But if you want to hear these stories, let me know. But when Balder died, the entire earth got dark. Remember, he was the god of light and joy, purity, and the summer sun. So the world went dark and the entire earth mourned. Every living thing loved this god, including Loki. Then in Christian lore, another disastrous dinner party occurred in 33 AD. Jesus and his 12 disciples had what's known as the Last Supper. So it was the night before the Last Supper happened, the night before his crucifixion by Roman soldiers on Good Friday, what's called Good Friday. It is believed that Judas Iscariot, Christ's betrayer, was the 13th guest to arrive. So, again, with the 13 dinner guests or the number 13, really, really prominent in Norse mythology and then years later in Christian mythology. And that brings us to Friday. So Christ was crucified on what's called Good Friday by the Christians. The reason it's called Good Friday is because it was the catalyst to him overcoming death and being able to resurrect. But it was still a very, very horrible, horrible day for the Christians. Remember the god Balder, who was killed by his 13th guest Loki? Well, he was the son of the goddess Frigga. She she was also called Freya. She's either Frigga or Freya. Say that 3 times fast. Um, she presided over love, marriage, and destiny. And the day Friday was named after her. So Christians at that time, when Christianity was becoming big, like many cultures before them either incorporated cultures into their own religion by swallowing it up and making it part of their culture, or by deifying it, by making it something really bad. And in this case, they completely deified Frigga. They said that she was a witch, and so they said that Friday, her day, was Witch's Day. Some of the most terrible things in the Christian lore are said to have happened on Fridays, like the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Eve's temptation of Adam with the forbidden fruit is said to be happened on a Friday. And also the worst thing, well, I don't know. In my mind, it's a contender, but the historians say the worst thing that happened was Abel was slain by his brother Cain, the first murder. What happened on a Friday. So they really pushed this whole Friday bad thing. And it was a hell of a marketing strategy because thousands of years later, Fridays can have a bad connotation. Now, with the work week, woohoo, thank God it's Friday, right? But there still are a great deal of people who are afraid of Fridays. So, how did the number 13 and Friday segue into Friday the 13th specifically? So there is one theory, and oh lordy, I'm gonna try not to go into this too much because this is about something I absolutely love. So it was Friday the 13th, October of 1307. King Philip IV of France arrested hundreds of Knights Templar. The Catholic Crusaders were apprehended under pressure from Pope Clement V. Now, Pope Clement did not give the order. It was Philippe who gave the order. Pope Clement just backed it up because it was such a slur on the church, and the Knights Templar were Catholic crusaders. So there were allegations made by an excommunicated former member of the Knights Templar who said that new recruits to the order were being forced to spit on the cross, deny Christ, and engage in sexual acts during initiation ceremonies. I remember, well, you may not know this, but Knights Templar was a celibate group. So the claims, seemingly entirely without foundation, were a convenient way for Philip to persecute this wealthy order. I mean, these people were so wealthy. They were kind of like the loan sharks of their time. But he owed them money for a war that he had with England. They funded his war. So he found this great way to get rid of them by saying that they were evil and they were against the church, and he got out of his debt. It was not so much that it was Friday the 13th, though that happened to be the day it happened on. It was just consummate greed, like extreme greed. So, charged with the moral and financial corruption and worshiping false idols, often following confessions that were obtained under torture, many of the knights were later burned at the stake in Paris. The order's Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, faced the flames in front of Notre Dame Cathedral and is said to have cried out a curse on those who persecuted its members. He said, God knows who is wrong and who has sinned. Soon a calamity will occur to those who have condemned us to death. The events initiated by the holy warrior's arrests, according to tradition, ensured that every subsequent Friday the 13th meant bad luck to one and all, his hex ringing out through the ages. Now, the hex is not documented. We do believe that was added in the many years later. Um, 1900. So what's that? About 600 years later. And The day was remembered, but it was never ever really remarked upon as Friday the 13th. That didn't factor in. It was Friday the 13th, even though that's horrendous with my Knights Templar. Yes, they're called them mine because I am fascinated with them. It wasn't actually associated with bad luck until 1907, when a young man named Nathaniel Lachenmeyer published his novel titled Friday the 13th. Now, this novel was about evil stockbrokers and greedy men, and one of the first paragraphs, or the first paragraph in the book, he says, I opened my eyes and beheld the calendar. It was the dreaded Friday the 13th. Now, it seems kind of weird that a book could start a whole superstition. Now, granted, these were two separate superstitions for many years on their own, but it was Nathaniel Lachenmeyer who they think combined the two to be one. Back in 1907, there weren't books weren't as easy to get as they are now, and there weren't as many written, obviously, or as many circulated, published, and all of that. So one book could change the world, and they really and truly believe that this was the book, because it wasn't until after this book was published, wasn't until 1913, that anything else was ever recorded and documented as Friday the 13th being bad. So up until that point, it was just like, oh yeah, this happened on Friday the 13th, but nobody put the two together to make it something evil. So because of Nathaniel Lachenmeyer's book, many to this day associate the stock market crashes to Friday the 13th, even calling them Black Friday, not to be confused with the shopping day after Thanksgiving. But I spent quite a few hours looking up dates on stock market crashes. First, I looked up all the stock market crashes that ever happened, and then I looked up the dates, and then I looked up the year, what day that fell on. And the only stock market crash that ever fell on Friday the 13th was the stock market crash in 1989, and that was considered a mini crash. Of the six major crashes that historians have written about, the 1907 crash, which totally interests me because Lachenmeyer wrote his book in 1907, and I could not find anything on the publication date, but I have to wonder, did that stock market crash happen after the book was written? Did it happen before the book was written and he wrote about, made up a story about evil stockbrokers? I'm like, I gotta know if anybody knows the date that Friday the 13th by Nathaniel Lachenmeyer was written and published. Please let me know. It's killing me. I can't find it. So, 1907 stock market crash, get this, was October 19th on a Saturday. The next big one was the Wall Street stock market crash in 1929, November 13th on a Wednesday. In 1987, October 19th, 80 years after the 1907 stock market crash, to the day, October 19th, we've got two of them. It was a Monday. And then the Japanese stock market crash in 1992, August 6th, a Thursday. And finally, there are others, but none of them were on Friday the 13th. But our last stock market crash was the COVID-19 crash. It began on February 20th, which was a Thursday, and the largest drop in the stock market over its period was March 16th, a Monday. So even though there's a lot of conjecture out there that the stock market fails or the stock market goes lower on Friday the 13th, there is absolutely no conclusive evidence to support that fact. And it is very much tied with the book that was published in 1907. So I did some research also on records of some historical dates where disaster struck, and Friday the 13th was specifically mentioned. Um, Aside from the whole Knights Templar disaster, none occurred as being specifically pointed out as, oh my God, this was Friday the 13th, before 1907 when that book was published. So I'm going to read you just a couple of them because there are a lot of them. But one of the biggest ones in 1940, during World War II, Nazi Germany began an intensive bombing campaign against the United Kingdom, targeting London in particular. 16 different occasions Buckingham Palace was bombed. It was hit. But one of the most destructive of these occurred on Friday the 13th, September 13th, 1940. Queen Elizabeth and King George VI were in the palace. Luckily, they weren't hurt, but 5 bombs struck the palace, one of which destroyed the interior of the royal chapel, and another ruptured a water main. 3 people were injured, and one was killed. So for a bomb like that, they were actually pretty lucky. Never lucky to be bombed, though, don't get me wrong. Okay, then on July 13th, which was a Friday in 1951, the Kansas floods happened. Now, the Kansas floods, they were just this freak flash flood that it rained so much so fast that the entire area just bloop flash flood. 28 people were killed and 500,000 residents were displaced. That's insane. And then one of the most horrifying ones to me is on March 13th, 1964. Bar manager Kitty Genovese was stabbed and raped by a stranger, Winston Moseley. The attack took more than a half an hour, and the early New York Times article reported that 38 people witnessed and heard the attack and failed to call the police. 38 people. This tragic case became the staple in psychology classes as a way to illustrate the bystander effect, where people ignore crimes going on around them. That one breaks my heart. That's a horrible thing. Another one was that a deadly cyclone struck history on Friday, November the 13th in 1970 in Bangladesh. The Bola cyclone killed at least 300,000 people, almost 45% of that population in that city. That is catastrophic. Um, there have been plane crashes. There have been freak blizzards. There have been cruise ships capsizing on these days. But remember, nothing specifically relating bad luck to Friday the 13th was ever written until after 1907. So I think in these cases, these bad things, if they had happened without the superstition, they would have been noted, but uh, they wouldn't have added to any kind of superstition or even started a superstition of their own. Remember, we're going on 4,000 years with the number 13, and 3,000 years ago, and only what, 18, 19, 20. Hold on, I'm doing some math here. Only 300 years ago? No. 1907 was 113 113 years ago that book was written. So it's had 113 years to get its steam on and tell all these stories where there would be more of them if there were really anything to it. The problem is, what do we do if we suffer from this phobia? Um, because phobias are very, very real. And if you've been told enough stories and you grew up believing this, these things ingrain themselves into your psyche like you would not believe. We all have little superstitions that we might do just in case, knock on wood. But these phobias are super real. So the first thing that Dr. Donald Dossey recommended was not to try to fight these superstitions with logic. Phobia and superstitions, much like love, have no logical basis to begin with. And if you try to fight him with logic, the phobia just digs its feet in. So he used a lot of humor, and he used a lot of common sense. But the main thing he said was that if you can take the day off and stay home, do it. If you can do that without losing your job or ruining your life, go ahead and just stay home and enjoy the day. It's the best thing you can do, especially if you suffer from the panic attacks that come from it. That's horrible. So the good news is only 3 Friday the 13th can happen in any given year. And this year we're super lucky. Haha. We only have one for 2021, and that will be August the 13th, will be Friday the 13th. So we only have one this year. And if you're curious to see in the future, instead of having to comb through every single calendar or month, if you want to know when the next year's Friday the 13th fall, or even the next 20 years, the only way a month can have a Friday the 13th is if it begins with a Sunday. So just check the months that start with Sunday and uh and go from there, and you'll know when it's coming up so you won't get caught unawares. So one of the things that I really liked about Dr. Donald Dossey, he's done several interviews. He's done a lot of interviews. He passed away in 2016, and the world will miss his intelligence and his investigative skills and his humor. Yes, his humor. He was a very funny man. But one of the things that he recommended, and I love it, was learn to say, and I still don't know how to say it, paraskevidochytriaphobia. Well, I keep putting R's in it. Paraskevidochytriaphobia. I am no longer afraid of Friday the 13th, and you don't have to be either. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I really like to know that if there's somebody out there listening, or if there's anything special that you want to hear, you have a superstition that you were raised with, and you want to know where the heck did that come from, let me know. I'm always happy to research and find out. I will see you next time on